Welcome to the Defiant. I'm your host, Tegan Klein. I'm thrilled to be joined by Alex, the co-founder and CEO of Matter Labs, the initial team behind ZK-Sync. Alex is a renowned physicist and entrepreneur, and today we dive into the founding story of ZK-Sync, the launch of ZK-Sync, why they chose to help scale Ethereum, and if they stand by that decision today, the ZK-Sync mission, alpha around getting involved in ZK-Sync today, when token, as well as new use cases on ZK-Sync, and so much more. But first, Alex is going to tell us the founding story of ZK-Sync.
So the story really begins with my personal experience. Like, at least for me, I grew up in Ukraine, moved to Germany when I was, I think, 20. And I experienced, growing up in Ukraine made me realize how important freedom is for the well-being, for the prosperity of the society at each level of the society. And I grew to appreciate freedom more and more and more and more. And at some point, I saw Bitcoin and then Ethereum as the most promising technologies that can bring more freedom into this world, like make people really, truly sovereign in deepest sense, because the digital assets and digital identity is becoming more and more real. It's becoming more real than your physical assets in some way. And controlling it truly, like having it in your hand, is really important. And so I thought, like, this is the place where I really want to be. It's the intersection of the technology, which is one of my passions, and freedom, which is the other one. And I looked with Bitcoin. It felt like too premature technologically. It just didn't feel like, you cannot really onboard 1 billion people into it with managing their own seed phrases and storing it securely and using Bitcoin. Like, there was a lot of the CX issues, but Ethereum held the promise to actually deliver this potential of crypto. So I jumped right into it, and I was looking into problems that needs to be solved in order for us to get to the real worldwide mass adoption of Ethereum. And I realized that scalability is going to be the most technologically challenging one. And then I learned about zero-knowledge proofs, and it was clear that it's a perfect match. Like, this is how we solve scalability, and we bring crypto in the hands of basically everyone in the world.
Amazing. And you kind of alluded to it, but there are some core values. There's kind of a core ethos, if you will, of crypto. And there are many new people kind of entering this industry, especially with the NFT boom that we saw. What would you say to those newcomers on some of those core values? What are those?
They are the values that originally come from the cyberpunk movement. I've mentioned freedom, which is the overarching goal. But to get to this freedom from the technical perspective, you need things like trustlessness, permissionlessness. So, like, you should be able to participate without asking anyone, without the explicit allowance from certain people or groups of people. You want, and which actually enables this inclusivity. Everyone can be part of it, and everyone can participate. Then you have security, because if it's trustless and permissionless, but you can be rug pulled tomorrow, it's not really feasible as a solution. So it has to be secure, trustless, permissionless, self-custodial. You have to actually own it. You don't want to hand your assets to someone else. So those are the core principles that we build this technology on.
Amazing. And I know it can be confusing for some because you have ZK-Sync, you have Matter Labs. Break it down. What's the difference? ZK-Sync
is the protocol we're building. We started with version 1, which is now called ZK-Sync Lite, which was more a prototype to demonstrate, to experiment with zero-knowledge proofs, show what's possible. And now we're focusing all of our efforts on the ZK-Sync Era protocol. And Matter Labs is just the company behind it. It's a company, it's an organizational form that created these protocols and will eventually be just one of the many contributors into this technology, the network that we're building. But it's more than a network. It's very similar to Ethereum. It's a movement. It's an extension of Ethereum. It's scaling Ethereum to the extent of the real world, which is our mission. And we have a very clear vision how we get to this 1 million transactions per second or 1 billion users. It's a very clear path technologically, but it only works if the community organizes and solves the non-technical issues. And I think that it's very important that we have this idea of community ownership in crypto. So like all the code we build is fully open source. Everything we do is we try to rely to the greatest extent possible on cryptography and pure math and pure coding, which like with open source everyone can verify themselves, so that we get to this trustlessness, like avoiding the trust and validators, at least for the most critical pieces of the puzzle, which is security and this trustless resilience. By the way, I forgot to mention one really important key property of the systems is they are resilient not just against potential attackers like your usual hackers and whatnot, but against like very powerful forces of this world. Like you can withstand, if you have your Bitcoin on Ethereum key, the super nations like US, China, and Russia, and like all these countries combined cannot really decipher it if they use all the supercomputers of the world. It puts an individual in a very, very powerful position. So like resilience is one of these things, and it comes with this community that backs the system. Because if something goes wrong, you always Matter Labs is just a company. Like we could something can happen to this company. It can get dissolved. The people can get evil. This happens all the time. Over time, people change. You want the community to be the guardian of the values, and if something is not working, the community should take the lead, fork the system, and keep it in. Migrate to this new deployment and keep everything on the path towards the values, towards the vision that was originally created. And so the community is really the key piece of the resilience point.
Totally. And it feels like governments aren't really liking that we're giving so much power and control back to individuals, at least it seems at the moment, which is kind of interesting and ironic because at least here in the US, we used to be pro-freedom, but it feels as though, day after day, more politicians on both sides are advocating against freedom and for more control at the government level. Any comments or thoughts about that?
Well, I think there are different politicians, and some are more pro-freedom. They are keeping this conservative, or not conservative, this traditional approach, coming out of the spirit of the Declaration of the U.S. independence and the U.S. Constitution. Then there are, of course, opposing forces, and there are a lot of incentives for those forces to be opposing. I think the only solution to this is for the citizens to demand to stand to their rights and actually enforce their rights and go and say, we're going to use this and we're going to be opposing, we're going to be calling our representatives and pushing this on the political side, but also we want to create something very resilient on the technological and societal side that the politicians can't really attack. And we have a few examples of where this popular movement actually won over the opposing forces with the politicians. One interesting example, which is very close to what we're doing, is the BitTorrent. You remember the war on BitTorrent, where you have to pay $1 per song to download it, which was a completely unsustainable and an unnatural model, and people just started using torrents to download the songs for free in the movement of a protest, and then the companies and these powerful copyright agencies had to give up eventually and come up with more modern things like Spotify and Netflix models came out of it, which were much more reasonable. So this is what we want. We want to find a balance which is going to be more beneficial for the individual, for the people, and this is what's happening when you actually fight for your rights through the use of technology. This has been the history of human civilization and of technological progress for the past couple of millennia.
Absolutely. And it's why censorship resistance at the protocol level is so crucial. And you mentioned that there are some non-tech issues that need solved. Can you double click on what those are? Just because there's this common misconception that you have to be an engineer to enter crypto, and that's not true. So maybe for an audience who is less engineer minded, what are those problems that need solved on the non-technical side?
Well, what we're building is the protocol. It's basically the IP of this new emerging internet of value, as we call it, like the Web3, where a network that is capable of transferring and programming value and things around value. So like our mission is just to build this basic layer, the basic brick of this protocol, which is like, like what connects different applications. Now, someone else has to build the applications. This requires a lot more work than just engineering work. You have to think through the problem. You have to talk to the customers. You have to understand their needs. You need to design the system, market it, sell, and get investment, get a lot of people organized. So that's a lot of work, and there is a lot of there are startups, there are companies that are building this, there are ecosystem services around all of that, and then there is a lot of just general needs for educating people, for creating learning materials, for talking to politicians, explaining all the things. It's a very broad movement. Even if you participate just by using these systems and sharing some feedback and putting your money and stake in there, you're already contributing. So it's really it's a cycle that gets this is what happened to the internet. In the early days of the internet, a lot of people did not believe that it will take off. Some people were stating that internet will have no more impact on the world than a fax machine. It was not obvious. A lot of companies were very late to embrace internet. They thought no one is going to be purchasing things online. This is insane. No one is going to be doing contracts online. You need a physical signature. And all of these things changed. So what I believe deeply is that Web3 is going to do to the world of value a similar thing that the internet did to the world of information. That you basically, everything that touches value will go on-chain and will become programmable, from payments to trading to all the stocks and assets that are tradable, to property titles, to invoices, to bonus points and tickets and so on and so on. And then first these things will be just mimicking the world pre-blockchain, and then we'll see things that were not thinkable before blockchain. And NFTs is one of them, right? This is something you can create a piece of you can put a piece of paper saying you have a title to this great painting, right? And then it could be tradable. But it was not possible before to have this piece owned by 10,000 people, or to have a group of people with shared identity because they are part of this club. And now it's exclusive, and now maybe they share values and they can coordinate and actually do some collective action. And it's all programmable, and the rules are immutable, or at least the rules are pre-agreed upon, and if you have to change them, you have to follow a certain procedure, which is enforced mathematically. This is amazing. This is this innovation wave that will be happening, and I'm really excited to see where it will get us. But it will definitely be something no one can envision. Vitalik, I think in one of the interviews said he did not see the NFT wave coming because it's kind of counterintuitive, right? It's that's what defines the great innovation, right? Where it's unknown. I don't know what's coming. I know what I need to do to enable that, and this is what we're working on with ZkSync. We have our narrow focus. We don't want to go and we don't want to become with Matter Labs with the team behind the core team behind ZkSync. We don't want to be something like Google or Facebook or one of these huge mega companies with thousands of people. We don't want to grow beyond 150 people, a small tribe where everyone still knows everyone else. We really want to focus on one thing and do it really, really well. And we want everything else to be done by others. Because what it means, it's this Ethereum culture of subtraction. This is what Ethereum Foundation promoted very actively and is following honestly through. of like, we have our thing, this is our mission, and we want to empower other people and other teams and other organizations to contribute to build some great stuff on top of that. So this is why ZkSync will, like, initially as a movement, I want to see it credibly neutral, not taking sides, not promoting certain projects over the others. Like, this is what we will be like building initially, and we expect the community to embrace this value and carry it forward. And we want to see other people building stuff on top of it. And we actually see a lot of traction. We see a lot of things being built on ZkSync now. We have, I think, tens of thousands of smart contracts already deployed. We have hundreds of projects that we know about. A lot of them new. A lot of them are existing Ethereum projects that are just about to deploy. A lot of the OGs, the DeFi blue chips, the NFT blue chips, are in the process of deploying or have already deployed and rolling out the applications. But we also see a lot of really interesting novel use cases, in part because ZkSync enables it. Like, we have introduced some features, and we'll always be introducing some features that you will not see anywhere else that are unique to what we're doing there. So, and we're really excited to see people using those features.
Amazing. Yeah, it's all about empowering the ecosystem and community more than one company. So it's great that you're kind of walking the walk and talking the talk as well. And so you've been building for a really long time, and you chose to help scale Ethereum. And back then, there were less layer ones. Do you still stand behind the decision to support Ethereum as opposed to maybe other layer ones like a Solana, as an example?
Oh, absolutely. Well, apart from the fact that we now have more TVL than Solana at the moment, the Ethereum ecosystem was an obvious choice because it shared the values very deeply with us. The values that we talked about previously: trustlessness, resilience, censorship resistance, permissionlessness, they are embedded into Ethereum architecture. Like, all the design decisions that the Ethereum core team is making are judged against those principles very deeply, honestly. The Ethereum emphasizes decentralization over throughput, because that's the job of a layer one, to make the most resilient, the most secure, most decentralized network. Whereas in my opinion, decentralization is not a value per se. A lot of people talk about we want to decentralize, we want a decentralized platform. I think it's a means to an end. It's an important means. I don't know how else you can achieve that. But to be truly resilient, you need to decentralize at a technical level with hundreds of thousands of full nodes as Ethereum and full validators that Ethereum network has. And on top of that, with a very broadly decentralized community with a lot of contributors, with a lot of organizations and teams and individuals and stakeholders who are standing for Ethereum values and for this culture, this ecosystem. And so, Ethereum is focusing more than any other L1 on these core fundamental properties. Now, it lacks scale precisely because of these limitations. And this is our job with this additional piece of technology, which is really the most one of the most amazing technologies I've ever encountered in my life, in the beauty how it's internally structured, which is zero knowledge proofs, or succinct zero knowledge proofs. They used to be called the magic moon math, because it feels like magic is when something works that seemingly should not. Right? You open the box and all of a sudden there is a rabbit in the box and you don't expect this. This is why people have this all feeling towards zero knowledge proofs. You can prove an execution of millions of operations, and you can verify it in just a few simple arithmetic operations on an elliptic curve, or on just in primary fields, and just very basic math gives you a result which proves that a ton of work has been done, very asymmetrically, and with very high degree of probability. You can be sure that this is correct. And when I say high degree of probability, that's astronomical probability. So it's basically you have a guarantee that it's correct. So that's our contribution. Scale. We just make Ethereum scalable to our ultimate mission is to get us to unlimited scale, to boundless scalability. And this has a very precise definition, like keeping all the other properties as they are: security, trustlessness, resilience, censorship resistance, permissionlessness. We need to get to a point in, like, basically we're building the internet, so we need to be like the internet. The internet is not limited by, like, you can have like 1,000 users simultaneously accessing the website. It doesn't make sense, right? Like you should be able to add more servers, more hardware, more routers, more internet connections to extend it basically, like without any limits. This is what we're building with ZkSync. You cannot achieve it with a monolithic blockchain. It's just physically not possible. You can't imagine internet, all of the websites and services and databases of the internet running on one single server, right? Or even in one single data center. That's not feasible. You need more. In a similar way, what we're building is going to be like this network of extensible blockchains, but then fully seamlessly interconnected. Just like email, like you have your address on one domain and you can send email to any other address on any other domain, and it works like point to point. You don't have like additional overhead in terms of effort you need to do to send this email, or trust assumptions, or like, you don't have to pay extra or wait much longer.
Absolutely. And I love your point on kind of choosing Ethereum because if the Ethereum ecosystem shares your values. And I think that that's a really important point for listeners to double click into, because it is important, right? And as you think about building in the space or joining a project in this space, make sure that the projects have the values that Alex outlined, because it really is crucial to the movement and how far you'll go and the network effects you'll build. So with that, I want to get to the ZK-Sync launch in a moment. But before we do, I want to double click because there's many founders that are listening. You did an incredible fundraise. You brought in a lot of top VCs. And I know that you turned a couple VCs that were originally no's that maybe passed on the deal into yeses. Tell us how you did that.
Very simple. We shipped. So basically, we went to Andreessen Horowitz and we pitched the idea of building a ZK VM. We said, like, we believe this is possible, like going from where we are with application-specific rollups, very rigid, just doing one function, to deploy any contract that you can write for Ethereum. And they passed. And we were shocked because we thought the pitch is very strong. And then we back-channeled, and it turned out that they asked Dan Bonnet, probably the most significant cryptographer, the most highly quoted cryptographer living today in the world. And he said, this is not feasible. This will take like 5 years. And this is why they passed. And we were like, okay, so what? So we built the first prototype, and half a year later, we showed them the prototype. And they're like, oh, and then they organized a meeting with Dan Bonnet. And then we explained the idea to him. We explained how we did this. What's the trick? Like, what are the heuristic, certain design decisions that we took that enabled us to go from this highly inefficient, in performance-wise, zero-knowledge proof protocols that we had back then to building this solution. And he was like, oh, this makes a ton of sense. And we're like, of course it makes a ton of sense. And then we closed this round without a pitch deck. You want to work on the problem that people want to see solved, and you want to ship you need to demonstrate that you can do it, and that you can do it better than existing solutions.
Totally. And it's not just shipping, but it's also updating and having that persistence to kind of go back and continue communicating, which, hats off to you for doing. Amazing. So tell us about the recent launch. How did it go? Any lessons learned?
Well, we're very excited. We are now the third largest L2 on Ethereum in terms of TVL. We're very humbled by such a broad interest from the user community, from developer community, from all the people who are building on ZkSync, and there is a grassroots movement around. I see lots of accounts on Twitter, like explaining, like sharing materials, explaining how ZkSync works, explaining like how features, architecture is functional. We get in touch with them. Like I'm very impressed. We have very high transaction volumes. We're actually number 2 most used L2 on Ethereum as of today for the past month, for the entire month. I think If you go to l2b.com, you will and click on activity, you can see that I think we are at 17 million transactions versus Arbitrum has 25 million transactions last month, and everyone else is like below 8. Which is very interesting because like those transactions are not cheap today. You still have to pay for the data availability to Ethereum, which is very non-negligible. Like a transaction costs somewhere between like 30 cents and maybe $3, depending on the gas fluctuations on Ethereum. So these costs will go down a lot. We're working on lowering them further from where they are today, and we will in the very short term you will see like significant updates to this. On top of that, Ethereum itself is working on the solution called EAP 4844 or like proto-dunk sharding, which will lower the costs for all rollups, for all L2s by I don't know, like by an order of magnitude, at least by like 10 times or 25 times. We will see how exactly. But the costs will go down. It will be more cheap, even more cheap. And so we'll see probably a lot more users and use cases and activity. And this is a very exciting thing. So like Ethereum is clearly on the rise with all the L2s and specifically with ZkSync.
Absolutely. And with that, do you think that ZK-Rollups will flip optimistic rollups like what Arbitrum and Optimism are using?
I think that eventually and in a very near term, everyone will be able to see the abyss between the what optimistic rollups and what ZK rollups are capable to offer. So I think in the long term, it's likely that we'll mostly have ZK rollups on Ethereum. Like maybe optimistic projects will pivot at some point. Like it will take them a long time. It's not trivial. Like it's not that you can just like take an optimistic engine and supplement it by ZK. You have to actually re-architect. You know, like it's like if you're building a Zeppelin and you want to add a jet engine to it, then you actually need to get rid of this big thing and add wings and the proper like air design. And it's not trivial. Like you have to rework things from ground up, but that is necessary for them. I think they all realize by now, like many of the optimistic rollup projects realize that they fulfill a very important function today, but tomorrow they will have to leave way to ZK rollups. Just because the properties that the ZK rollup give you, like the lower latency of transactions, much lower cost for a lot of use cases, much higher security, much better bridgeability, this extensibility of the network where you can go, like building what we call hyperchains, other L2s and L3s that are all interconnected is only seamlessly possible with ZK rollups. So from all these perspectives, like ZK rollups are, and we have not even started talking about ZK Porter and data availability problem, which offers another dimension of discussion, which we probably don't want to go now because it's going to be very deeply technical. But it will be just in the very short term, it will be obvious how more powerful ZK rollups are.
Absolutely. And I want to get into how the different layer 2s will work together in a moment. But before we do, just maybe for a founder listening who's about to go through a launch, can you give your top 3 pieces of advice of what you would give to them, just given that you went through it?
That's a really good question. I would just do a lot of things, like focus on the problem, start with the right problem, pick the right problem in the right market. That's going to be the single most important decision you make that will affect you much more than any other fluctuations inside the market. And like even your if you are building a orange stand, like orange juice stand, then like no matter how much effort you put in, you're never gonna build something that affects like 1 million people, right? So the market and the problem are the most critical pieces. So that would be advice to myself like 10 years ago when I was doing other startups. And from there, I would focus on building and get, there are 2 types of people, like Nassim Taleb, who I highly recommend, like all of his books, even though he's a little bit of a difficult personality and like you can feel it throughout the books, but he has brilliant ideas. He says like there are like very undiplomatically there are builders and there are BS sellers. right? So like as a founder, you want to surround yourselves by builders. You want your team to be mostly, like at least in this initial phase, to be mostly focused on building stuff, on getting things done, on getting people who have this mentality of like, I'm just going to sit down and do it no matter what. You know, like they somewhat like this reality distortion field that was attributed to Steve Jobs. Like there are some people like they don't see obstacles. They just believe they can get it and they go and get it. And they eventually somehow it gets done. So you want those people, and you don't want a lot of them. You want a few and just focus on the problem and build something and demonstrate that you can do stuff. This is what worked for me, and what I can recommend from my experience.
I love that. And the best of us are difficult personalities at times. And so, there's Base, there's Optimism, there's Arbitrum, Polygon, EVM. How will these layer 2s work together as we kind of develop into the future from your standpoint?
Oh, we all have kind of friendly relationships. We meet at conferences, we discuss things, we cooperate on the standards, on the way we do contributions to Ethereum. So, for example, we were working on the account abstraction piece, and Ethereum core team proposed the idea of AP 4337. We took it as a base. We worked on it. We made some contributions. We actually had more freedom at ZkSync to develop it to build it as a native protocol. So we had less limitations than the Ethereum core team. But some of the things we built they really liked, and they took it back to the protocol like upstream, and they found their way to the canonical 457 implementation. And other L2 teams are doing the same thing. So like I see a lot of cooperation going on. Eventually, we're all gonna win when Ethereum wins, and the users win as a result of this competition of ideas and also cooperation and common contribution. So like I'm very positive and optimistic on this side. In terms of like how these protocols work together, like what's going to happen to the protocols? Well, we'll see some applications deploying on some of them, some applications deploying on all of them, and then the users choosing what's best for them in terms of the feature set, the cost of transactions, the latency, security properties, and other considerations. So I think it's going to be a very healthy dynamics of like figuring out what works best.
And then talking about competitive positioning, how does ZkSync compare to Starkware and Polygon EVM?
So with Starkware, I think it's very different. Starkware is like generally like somewhat aside from all the other L2 scaling solutions that are now popular, because they're not really EVM compatible. And even though there are some projects building like EVM-ish compatible things on Starknet, it's not going to be natively, native part of the protocol. It's going to be like on top of Cairo, on top of the other ecosystem. So they're building their own ecosystem with their own fan base, and they're experimenting with this new language, which is interesting. But like it's just a part. So there is the EVM world and Starknet. So I'm not going to talk about that much. In the EVM world, we are taking the technology furthest along the innovation line. So from all these projects, we are kind of taking the most radical approach on, like, let's imagine what we can build on L2 that you cannot otherwise build on Ethereum, and that you cannot build with, what superpowers do we get from this beautiful zero knowledge proofs, which other protocols are not quite doing. Like what I see them doing is focusing much more on backwards compatibility. If you look at Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, Scroll, they all emphasize this like backwards facing. Like, let's support EVM on the bytecode level. Let's support all the opcodes exactly as, like, everything should work exactly as it works on layer 1, which has value. Because like it has a lot, like it lowers the friction for developers. It gives you kind of like certain security guarantees on certain types of applications. It makes things easier to debug. Like some tooling will work on this kind of application, which will not work on ZkSync. But in doing that, they are kind of missing out on the opportunity to innovate. So like one example is account abstraction, which we do natively, which means that all accounts are account abstractable. Like all accounts are smart on ZkSync. Whether you have, like, you can have a MetaMask and you can still have a multi-call. Like it's possible to build an application with multi-call or with using paymasters, so that the protocol is going to be paying for you. So you can have gasless transactions with MetaMask, or you can have transactions where you're paying in any token, not just in a specific one, not in Ether or Matic or like some ZK-Sync token, whatever. You can choose, like, you know, if you only have DAI or USDC and you want to make a simple payment, why should you bother of getting some other tokens and using them? Like, you should be able to just pay in you know, like a fraction of a cent. If this is how we onboard 1 million users, or like the next 1 billion users to the ecosystem, where like they don't even think about it as a blockchain. They don't think like, oh, this is blockchain, so I have to like download this. You know, like a friend of mine, I can give you a more specific problem. Like, he was paid in crypto. He was promised, he did some consulting work and he got 1,000 USDC as a result of this work. So he was told, like, you need to create a Ethereum account. He was like, okay, like he created something, I don't remember, like it was a Trust Wallet or a MetaMask. He got that, he got the address, he gave the address to the employer, they sent him 1,000 USDC. And then he said to me, like, okay, how do I get it to my bank account and start paying for things? And I said, okay, you have to send it to an exchange. He said, I tried to send it to an exchange, but it says that I don't have enough funds to send it. But like, how is it possible? I have $1,000 there. And I had to explain to him that, well, this is not quite there. You need to like convert this to Ether, and then you have to pay this gas in Ether, and this is how it works. He said, like, I know, I've been told that already. So I tried to convert it from USDC to Ether, but it said I cannot convert it because I don't have Ether. How do I get Ether in the first place? You know, like this kind of catch-22 situation is like, you can't really onboard 1 billion people if you have UX like this. It has to be like seamless. On ZkSync, it will be seamless. You just go and you go to Uniswap and you convert from USDC to whatever you want, or you just make a payment and you pay like 5 USDC cents for this transaction, or whatever the amount is, right? Like, this is just one example where innovate. The other examples are coming very soon with you know, like the differences in the architecture, how we're working with data availability, the differences in how we process transactions. Like, we're not using Geth, for example. So we're not going to have all the limitations of Geth. We built a new full client, like full node from scratch in Rust, which is a lot more performant, has a lot of other properties that you cannot get from the old technology. So like, this is our positioning. We are the most future-proof, future-compatible, if you want, chain from all the L2s on Ethereum in the EVM camp.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you're focused on new use cases within the ZkSync ecosystem. Can you tell us a little bit about what those use cases are? What are you excited about?
Sure. So the with account abstraction, like one very basic use case is just to have a smart wallet that is not depending on a seed phrase, and that you can use to make normal payments, and like basically that is acting as your bank. Then there are you know, like we're not doing something that is outside of like what's generally possible on blockchain. So like the use cases are around things that you're familiar with, or in the areas of DeFi, NFTs, identity. We will have a lot of really interesting things with privacy, because privacy will come much cheaper on ZkSync than on any other L2s, for like EVM compatible L2s that are using call data and not state diffs. Because on ZkSync, you don't have to pay for publishing zero knowledge proofs. You only pay for verifying them, and this is cheap. This is going to be like a fraction of a cent. So you will be able to natively build applications that take advantage of the this like native out of the box support for zero knowledge proofs. And so we work also not just with blockchain or crypto native projects. We work a lot with the traditional enterprises, and I was surprised by the degree of interest we get from the banks and of, you know, like from the most innovative countries in the world, like Switzerland and Singapore and UK. from big corporations, from big payment providers, from supply chain companies, like who are now looking. They realized now that all the previous attempts of building their own intranets of blockchains failed, and they want to be on Ethereum. They want to be part of this global emerging internet of value, and that's the only way how you can actually like build stuff, as though it was not obvious after the internet adoption. And they are looking for L2s because obviously they cannot do it on L1. Like for the use cases that they bring, they need millions of people and millions and hundreds of millions of transactions per second eventually, cumulatively, the total throughput. So like we have a full spectrum of these use cases.
Yeah, permission blockchains don't work. Who would have thought? Amazing. And tell us a little bit about how privacy will work on ZkSync.
So as I said, we are focusing on the scalability. We're building the IP layer of this protocol, of this Internet of Value. Someone else has to build SSL or HTTPS on top of this IP protocol, right? Our job is to make sure that the computation and data availability are properly structured to incorporate the privacy. Like privacy is very computationally and data intense. So you need, like, the data has to come kind of for free. It should not go on chain. It should be embedded in your transaction and then discarded. And computation has to be extremely cheap so that you can process not only privacy. You know, like there are more cases that are enabled by ZK. Like think fully homomorphic encryption and multi-party computation and machine learning, like ZKML, where things will be like eventually, like not today. Like, this is very early, but maybe that's why it's very interesting. Where you will be able to like put AI on blockchain and prove that certain things are computed in like the outputs of this AI computations are what people actually like want them to be, and they were not manipulated, because otherwise you cannot see it from, like, you can distinguish the truth from fake today with all these powerful technologies. So like our job is to empower builders to create those protocols with really, really cheap transactions and very high throughput. That is what we're focusing on.
And how will that look in a world where we have privacy? Because I feel like a big reason why DeFi took off was because of the transparent nature to DeFi. So how do you envision that kind of evolving once we have the ability to have private transactions?
I don't see a contradiction. I think that you will have, like I saw really interesting protocols where you have private accounts held in a kind of this private pool, which is opaque and not visible from outside, like you can transact privately there. But then those accounts can actually go on the DeFi and interact with DeFi in a way that just no one knows who made this interaction. So obviously you will see on chain that someone has swapped 10 Ether for USDC on Uniswap, but you will not know who. And then those people will be able to they will be able to go and pay a merchant on the street from their wallet without disclosing to the merchant what's the amount on their wallet, which is like, otherwise it's not feasible. Like you cannot have a Twitter for your bank account, right? And just publicize to everyone, to all the world, how much assets you have, all the purchases you made, who you transact with, where you get your salary from, all of that has to remain private. Now, you have regulatory challenges around that, how you keep it from far from abuse, so that you don't get in a situation of tornado cash. And I have seen some proposals. I don't know what the eventual solution is going to be. I think it's too early to comment, but I see people innovating and trying different approaches. I think some of them will work, because you need to keep full privacy, and it's inevitable that there will be some abuse. I mean, how much abuse is it going on with cash on the streets? But you don't ban cash because of that. So, or how many people are, I don't know, criminals use the cars to get to the spot of crime, but you don't ban cars because of that. So you just want to make sure that the good use cases that everyone realizes that are good are dominant. That we have a lot more good things going on blockchain than bad things, and then I think it's going to be acceptable for everyone that you need privacy. It won't work otherwise.
Totally, yeah, and it's definitely a fundamental human right, privacy. And you mentioned that there are new dApps that have emerged on ZkSync. Can you tell us about those? Maybe some dApps that aren't on other chains?
I just don't want to to call out some of them and not call the others and give favors here. We can we have a comprehensive list of projects that are deploying. We have an ecosystem page where we do our best to enable everyone to put their project there. I would encourage people to go to ecosystem.zksync.io and you will see the you will check it for yourself.
Fair enough. And then talk to us a little bit about maybe some of the challenges that you've had to overcome while heading towards the launch.
Towards the launch, we mostly had just engineering work. So it was like we had to focus. We had to speak less publicly because we needed it's hard to hire engineers who are good, and we have a very high bar at Matter Labs. So it's like we are over 100 people now, and it's hard to hire more people. So we needed everyone who can code to code and to really focus on that. And we kind of disappeared from the public discourse space for a few months. Which we had to do. So we will always be prioritizing shipping over talking. Now we want to talk about things, so we want to explain what we're building, and we want to get people engaged, and we will be doing that. But the building things has a priority. The difficulties were of technical challenge. You have to build things properly. There is a huge responsibility in terms of security, building these protocols, because it's we've launched on mainnet the very first ZK VM. No one has ever done that before. It's a completely uncharted, untested territory where you have an entirely new vector of potential attacks on this system. So you want to build we can't afford a single security incident. So we had to think out of the box, how we're going to protect it. Not just building investing a lot into thinking about how to design the system in a secure way and auditing it. And we spent more than, I think, any other L2. We spent a couple of $1 million on the audits with the top tier auditors and big security contests from crowdfunded public security. But that was not enough. We introduced additional in-depth protection measures. In the initial period now, while the project has training wheels on, the withdrawals are kind of delayed by 24 hours. So that even if there is any compromise with proof systems or the cryptography itself, we still have time to intervene and it takes some protective measures. There are other things. So there was a lot of engineering and product work flowing into the system before it could be launched fully publicly. A lot of testing, a lot of iteration, actual testing with the public projects. We opened the network to developers a bit earlier than we opened it to the users. So the developers have time to test it under real conditions on mainnet and also report problems, and so we could calibrate and fix them and so on. So mostly problems of this type. I can't think of just growing the company has its own challenges, which every company at our stage faces. So nothing special there.
Totally. And sequencing is so important. And how are you guys thinking about data availability? Will you use something like an eigenlayer or maybe a Celestia?
So the eigenlayer is interesting. It's just a very interesting idea for using Ethereum security. This is something we can consider. Celestia is basically, in terms of data availability, my understanding is it's competing somewhat with Ethereum itself, because you have to be in order to create a native rollup on Celestia, you have to kind of be your own layer one, which I think is hard to accomplish. If you use Celestia in the same way as eigenlayer, which is the same way as we design ZK Porter, then it could make sense, but it's not really the in line with Celestia strategically positioning themselves for. So we will be exploring that, but in any case, we will pick something that is most beneficial for the ecosystem, for the broader ecosystem. We want to find a way to make it win-win for all parties.
Absolutely. And when you look at the Web3 stack, what would you say is missing? We have decentralized indexing, we have decentralized storage. Are there any pieces that maybe listeners should think about building that are missing?
For sure. Decentralized front-end and decentralized, which is an obvious third component which is missing there. If you have decentralized front-end, which can access decentralized indexing and decentralized transaction network, then you've gone full circle. Then you kind of have all-around solution that is fully resilient. We kind of have, we are very close there, right? Like you could own an ENS or unstoppable domain, which will point you to IPFS or RVIF. And with something like a Brave browser, you will be able to open the page without any servers. And then you have your front end there, and then you could probably use the graph for decentralized querying. I'm not sure what you would use for decentralized transaction sending. I don't think we are quite there yet in terms of like being able to actually transact from this application. And I think this is what breaks everything, and this is why very few people are doing this. Because what's the point of having decentralized decentralized front end and decentralized back end with smart contracts, which have to go through a centralized API of Infura or Alchemy or like any other centralized provider. So I think this provider layer decentralization, the access to the actual like nexus to the blockchain is the missing part. And once we nail that, it's going to be, we will build the website for ZkSync is going to be decentralized in this way. So it will actually be owned by the community, not by a single organization. There will be some kind of DAO that controls this ENS domain, and then the DAO decides what goes on this website, and like kind of has a voting process with updates going through, I don't know, some delegation. Like it's really interesting what you can do in the governance field. It's a whole huge area of its own development, which I'm observing with great interest.
Amazing. And when token, I know that's a big question that many have for you.
It's not something we're focusing on today because that's not the burning problem. The burning problem is to build a technology that solve the immediate problems of the users. The moment token becomes necessary for the next for the next step, for decentralizing things, for decentralizing the sequencer, for decentralizing data availability, for doing all these things, or like for governance, for making decisions, for giving it to the community. Like the moment it is necessary, you have to introduce it. But until then, like there are priorities which we have to focus on.
Totally. And, do you have any alpha for the audience? Maybe when there is a token, what can they do to start thinking about how they can earn some of those tokens in the future?
I would say I would rather ask a question like, what is in this network that that creates value for me, that I can use, that actually provides value today. It feels to me like if your only interest is token and kind of gaming system, it's not really the match with our values. So like I don't know how to answer that question because it's not what I'm thinking about. Like I'm thinking about the mission that we're building. The mission is to promote freedom for the world, like this individual freedom, empowering a single individual to have their own self-custody, self-control, self-ownership of their digital identity, digital assets, and doing this through building the systems. And like, it's a lot more interesting for me to talk about these things and to converse with people who are single-minded. So in any case, that's our focus for now.
Totally. But I think one of the other good values about this space is that it is a meritocracy and you can get compensated commensurate to the value that you bring. So fair enough. I completely agree with you. But maybe for those listening who are values aligned with everything that you've shared in this podcast, how do you recommend they get involved? And obviously, you have developers, but maybe for some that aren't developers, how can they get involved today?
they can just explore the system. They can get engaged in our Discord. They can engage in conversation on Twitter. They can propose things and think of like what's missing, provide feedback, provide, build, be part of the community and start the conversation about the governance, about the principles. How we will actually, we're doing a lot more now we will be shifting the focus somewhat from the technology, from this product area of direction of to what the governance and the community of the network is going to be long term and how we make it sustainable. So this is the conversation we want to start now, and I really encourage everyone to get in, become a participant in this conversation.
Amazing. And the last question is, how are you Defiant?
The very mission that brought ZK-Sync into existence is about defying the limitations of the current rigid structures of this old society and groups of interest, protecting your rights and your own personal freedom. I think it's like so inherently, profoundly, through and through everything we're doing. Like I won't be able to add a better definition to it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was great. I really appreciate the time, Alex.
Thank you, Tegan. It was a pleasure for me, and really grateful to all the listeners and watchers.